Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Kenny, and welcome to ESPN Classic's Top 5 Reasons You Can't Blame, a series that takes a fresh look at sports personalities who were remembered largely for their mistakes, controversial moments, or questionable decisions. Our mission is not to further vilify these individuals, but instead to challenge conventional wisdom and re-examine what has been accepted as fact. You'll see new evidence and hear new testimony. All you need is an open mind. In this show, we'll reconsider the case of Browns owner Art Modell, who incurred the wrath of an entire city when he pulled up stakes and took his Cleveland Browns to Baltimore. But before we give you the reasons why you can't blame Modell, let's take a look at how the story unfolded.
When you think about the history of football, you think about the Cleveland Browns as one of the oldest teams in the NFL.
When you look back at the names like Graham, Motley, Lavelli, Brown, they are icons in terms of what professional football has meant to Cleveland.
The Browns were untouchable during those years.
With 20 seconds left to play, Lou Groza boots it through the uprights, and the Browns win 30-28.
It harkens back to the Paul Brown days. Anytime you have as many championships that they had during that time, they become a big part of the city.
You won all the time, and so you knew that there was something in your life was going to go right once a week.
After buying the franchise in 1961, Art Modell continued the winning tradition. In 1964, he brought Cleveland its 4th NFL title in 15 years. And over his first 29 seasons, the Browns posted 22 winning records. In a town with a deep blue-collar identity, the self-made millionaire from New York seemed accepted and even admired.
Art's the great American success story. You know, a high school dropout who finds a way to own an NFL team with borrowed money.
I don't think the NFL would be what it is today without Art Modell.
He was one of the outstanding owners. He was always in the middle of everything. He was very key in TV negotiations.
He had been a loyal citizen of Cleveland for an awful long time and put an awful lot of money into the stadium, into the franchise, into the city itself.
He had said all along, I will never move the Cleveland Browns from Cleveland. I will never move them.
The Browns are indeed coming to Baltimore.
Halfway through the 1995 season, Cleveland residents were shocked to learn that the financially besieged Modell had secretly signed an agreement with Maryland officials to move the franchise, effectively shattering a 35-year relationship with one of the most loyal fan bases in the NFL.
I had no choice.
To not have a team in Cleveland was a big tragedy in my mind. I just couldn't imagine the Cleveland Browns not being in Cleveland.
For the Browns to leave here, you know, it was almost a sacrilege. You know, it was like the Bruins leaving Boston, the Yankees leaving New York.
I don't know that Art calculated the reaction would be that severe, but it was. And the enmity that Cleveland Browns fans had seemed to all center on Art Modell.
Go to hell, Modell, go to hell.
I'm firmly convinced that Art Modell is kind of like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
He publicly said that he didn't want a new stadium in this town. He asked for a renovated stadium. Financing for that renovated stadium was forthcoming. And then 2 days later is on a dais in Baltimore talking about the great Colts tradition.
We were just completely lied to and bamboozled. He never gave us any reason to believe that this was happening. And in the meantime, you know, they were cutting deals, you know, on planes on tarmacs.
The great irony is Art never put the gun to our head. He was very concerned about how people perceived him, and not wanting to be perceived as someone who was giving the city an ultimatum ended up putting him in an even worse light.
He never threatened to leave. He just up and left. If you really cared about the city, you at least threaten to leave. You just don't sneak off.
With 3 years left on his rental agreement with Cleveland Municipal Stadium, Modell bolted. He was the first NFL owner to break a lease.
Modell's motivation was money. Modell was a terrible manager. I mean, how you could pack Cleveland Muni Stadium, you know, Sunday after Sunday and still lose money is anybody's guess.
What Art Modell did to Cleveland was despicable. If he couldn't get what was needed, instead of moving, you sell the team and you let somebody else try.
He spat in the face of people who had shown almost dog-like loyalty to him for the 35 years he owned the team.
Art Modell is the one to blame for the death of the Cleveland Browns.
Things are not always as they seem, and we're here to say you can't blame Art Modell for moving the Browns to Baltimore. Before we get to our top 5 reasons why Modell should not be blamed, let's take a look at the best of the rest. It was Al Lerner who introduced Modell to the Maryland officials with whom he would reach agreement to move the Browns to Baltimore. And in 1999, it was the same Al Lerner who would be hailed as a local hero for bringing the NFL back to Cleveland.
I was always amazed that Lerner escaped without some sort of blame for the assist in all this, you know, because he obviously made it possible.
Al was Art's friend, his business partner. Art was a friend in trouble, and Al helped him.
Al Lerner was the enabler. It was his jet that the negotiations took place and the papers were signed on.
There's always some people that do question Mr. Lerner's initial motives in introducing Art to the people in Baltimore.
There are some people who think there's sort of a Machiavellian streak in Lerner, that he would play these cards a certain way and that he would get off scot-free and become the savior of Cleveland.
Alfred Lerner will be the new owner of the Cleveland Browns.
You shake your head, you say, wait a second. Al Lerner bought the team, but he also helped Art Modell move the team to Baltimore. So should we like this guy or should we despise this guy?
The look, the throw, touchdown!
In 3 AFC championship games, John Elway broke Cleveland's heart. The most painful episode, known as the drive, occurred in January of 1987, when he took Denver 98 yards late in the fourth quarter to tie the game. While the home fans watched in dismay, the Broncos won in overtime.
The Browns never were quite the same after that, and less than a decade later, they didn't even exist anymore. I don't think things were ever the same in Cleveland, at least for the Browns after that day.
If we had got the job done that day against them Broncos, our team would have still been here. I don't think the team would have ever moved.
That would have changed the relationship between Art Modell and the city, and they'd have been able to sit down and accomplish whatever they needed to get worked out.
That damn John Elway kept us from 3 Super Bowls. Baltimore's to blame for that, because they drafted him and then traded him to Denver.
Although blame may be a bit harsh, even for Cleveland residents, it is interesting to consider what might have transpired if the Colts had convinced Elway, their #1 pick in 1983, to change his mind and play in Baltimore.
Maybe John Elway plays so well and the Colts are so good that Irsay doesn't move the Colts, and therefore there isn't a need for a move of the Browns to Baltimore. It's, what, the 6 degrees of John Elway. We can just blame it all on John Elway.
The dog pound is the best thing that ever happened to the NFL, in my opinion. You just felt a certain adrenaline when you got on the football field, and I think that the dog pound was behind that push.
Never wanted to go down that side because you knew what was going to happen. Either it was going to be so loud you couldn't hear yourself think, or you're going to get hit in the back of the head with a dog bone.
If you got close to the dog pound, you were going to feel the wrath of our fans. And we knew it, they knew it, and there was all advantage.
Welcome back. Let's get right to our countdown of the top 5. Reason number 5, Bill Belichick. Had he been anywhere near as effective as he would become at New England, the future of the Browns may have been different.
Maybe if we'd have gotten to the playoffs, sooner, got the euphoria of the city, maybe that could have changed some things. Can you imagine if we'd have been a Super Bowl team and not been able to get what we wanted?
Between 1985 and 1989, the Browns failed to reach the Super Bowl despite making the playoffs each season. After Cleveland went 3-13 in 1990, Belichick, a defensive coordinator fresh off a Super Bowl victory with the Giants, took the helm. But Cleveland and Belichick were never a perfect match.
There was a lot of anti-Bill Belichick sentiment at that time. There was just a lot of negativity surrounding the team.
You combine his personality at that time and one winning season in 5 years, he took a lot of the blame.
I think there was a feeling that he had this sort of Eastern superiority about him, and like, we don't know anything about football here.
The fans have become upset with the product that was on the field and also with the attitude that was thrown in their face. But there was a lot of disdain for Bill Belichick and his attitude.
He really was kind of clueless and had to handle media, ran off a bunch of very popular players, and he did it in a very kind of unfeeling way.
Bernie Kosar, cut tonight by the Cleveland Browns.
You don't cut Bernie Kosar and then say diminishing skills.
His overall production and I think the diminishing of his physical skills.
The business community was turning off to the Cleveland Browns, and I think part of the reason was Bill Belichick's personality that was hard to swallow.
The Bill Belichick years did not lend themselves to good feelings about the Browns. It was those years as much as anything that led to the team leaving.
Notify everyone 1 month before you move.
Before we reveal reason number 4, here's a look at other teams who have moved. The Browns were not the first NFL team to leave Cleveland. In 1946, the Cleveland Rams moved to Los Angeles after beating the Redskins for the NFL championship, starting a westward trend that would include other sports. In 1956, Giants owner Horace Stoneham and Dodgers owner Walter O'Malley took the air out of New York when they announced they were moving their teams to the West Coast. The Dodgers' success prompted Lakers owner Bob Short to move his team from Minneapolis to L.A. in 1960. The Lakers added 9 championships to the 5 they won in Minnesota.
If you look at all these moves, it has more to do with team owners simply see a new pot of gold somewhere else and move to take advantage of it.
That brings us to reason number 4. NFL owners Al Davis and Robert Irsay.
Irsay and Davis showed him that the money can be obtained, and if you're willing to turn your back on the community and the people that were your friends.
They made it possible to just pick up your team and move it. They set the precedent that it could be done.
After the 1981 season, Davis defied the NFL and moved the Raiders from Oakland to Tinseltown.
He never put it to the league for a vote. He just moved. He snubbed his nose at the league's rules and bylaws. He was going to challenge the system, and he did, and he won.
The Raiders' move in 1981 was really started a domino process that created a whole different atmosphere relative to the move of teams.
2 years later, in 1983, Irsay packed up the Mayflower and left Baltimore for Indianapolis under the cover of night.
You can talk about Irsay moving from there to Indianapolis, where it opened Baltimore, where Art eventually went. So, you could say that had, a lot to do with it.
Baltimore, I think, took it on its own accord to go out and do whatever it could to get a team back. And, so it had no qualms about pirating somebody else's team.
There was tremendous hope that the NFL would veto the move, that they would somehow block this move, and that the Cleveland Browns were not leaving town.
Oh, a ton of blame on the NFL. It's the owners. It's a fraternity. They're all about money. Their thinking is, well, if we vote against Art, what if I want to move one day? I may need his vote.
A good chunk of the owners were just very good friends with Art Modell. And this was a case where maybe friendship trumped what was best for one of the flagship cities in this league.
Cleveland is the most tortured sports city in America.
Here's Michael at the foul line. A shot on Elo. Good! The Bulls win! They win! Into the end zone. Oakland intercepted the ball.
Fortunately, I drank at that time in my life. As a Browns and an Indians fan, you get real used to being left at the altar.
Finer loses the ball. Denver recovers the fumble.
Back to the countdown. The Cleveland Indians check in at reason number 3.
The Indians came out and they won their first pennant since 1954, and it became a love affair. It became Indian summer, and the Browns were completely overshadowed.
The fact that we had a good young team that started to capture the fancy of the fans of Cleveland, it put them in some unfamiliar territory. They ruled Cleveland for decades.
I think in a way that the popularity and the acclaim that the Indians were getting hurt Art in some way.
In 1994, the Indians packed up their gear and moved out of Cleveland Municipal Stadium and into their new home, Jacobs Field.
When the Indians left Cleveland Stadium. The Browns lost a major tenant that was responsible for additional income.
There's only so much corporate money in Cleveland. We're selling 108 loges, and then a year later, we're selling 62, 63. Well, it's 40% of our revenue. Gone. 81 games. Gone. It was a financial disaster at Cleveland Stadium.
After he saw, you know, how people reacted to a brand new, beautiful facility like Jacobs Field, I think that stung a little bit.
Football was the #1 sport here, and Mr. Modell probably felt that he should get preference over the Indians. That didn't happen.
The Cleveland Browns wouldn't have moved if they weren't basically forced to take a second-rate citizenship there.
Everyone saw the potential now of what a new stadium would do in terms of attracting fans and excitement and dollars. And the Browns were starting to fall to the back of the pack in terms of attention and affection for the fans.
3 reasons down and 2 to go. Here's reason number 2. Art Modell had no choice. He was on the brink of financial ruin.
He was going down the tubes financially. He bought everything on credit. And by borrowing money his entire life, it finally capped out and drowned him.
He's got that huge debt. He has a bad stadium lease. So if he sells the Browns, what that would do for him personally is break even. He'd be left with no franchise, no money, and a legacy as a failed businessman.
We forget that football is a business. There is the element of making a profit to stay equitable with the rest of the league.
Contributing to Modell's cash flow problems was the changing face of the NFL.
Free agency came about, and so your ability to have cash to pay signing bonus was needed. And if you didn't have the revenues to do that, then, you know, it was just going to put you further behind.
I had to go out and borrow $5 million to give Andre Rison a bonus. I didn't have the money.
75% of our revenues were going to our players to pay the salary cap. Around the league, those with good stadium deals, only 40% of their revenue was going to players. That's a huge disparity.
We didn't know the details of his financial circumstances, how desperately he needed the enhanced stadium revenue to remain viable.
That ball club would have gone bankrupt, and he would have lost the franchise if he'd have stayed in Cleveland. So he really had no choice but to go to Baltimore.
I know that he wouldn't have done it unless he thought it was absolutely necessary, because he really felt that his only financial survival would be to make that move.
If Art Modell had owned Art Modell Lincoln Mercury, and somebody had come along and said, "You're not going to give you a deal down in Baltimore," no one would have thought a thing about it.
Mr. Modell did what was best for him and his family. I think a lot of people in Cleveland, if they were put in that same situation, they would do the same thing.
I was brutalized at the move, but I had to do what I had to do to keep my family business alive, period.
They built Rock and Roll Hall of Fame before they gave Art Modell a stadium, and so I'm blaming the Beatles, Elvis, whatever.
How do you go and build the Hall of Fame of rock and roll in Cleveland and not a new stadium for the Cleveland Browns?
It seemed like the city was more interested in keeping the baseball team and having a rock and roll legacy than keeping the Browns.
When they built the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on the banks of the lake, that was the straw that broke Art's back.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was just part of an urban revitalization project that cost $685 million. But the Browns were left to play in a crumbling relic.
I put $72 million into that old barn, that old stadium. And then they proceeded to build a basketball arena for the Cavaliers, Jacobs Field for the Indians, built a science museum, and I couldn't get the Johns fixed in my upper deck.
He was literally patching and putting together that stadium with bubble gum and baling wire.
There were pieces of cement falling. You know, we'd get the safety inspectors over there saying, well, you can't have a game here till you fix these things. It was constantly costing money.
Art felt like he was waiting patiently, you know, losing all this money on Cleveland Stadium Corporation, and they were just building all these other things and ignoring Art.
The Browns was probably the #1 sports franchise in Cleveland. And yet the Cavaliers and the Indians got new arenas to play in. Why not us?
Modell insists he made his financial situation known to Mayor Michael White.
I know that he was appealing to the mayor and the city fathers, and I know that they did not come to his aid.
It didn't take a Romanian gypsy to figure this one out in the tea leaves. It was pretty obvious what was going to happen. But the primary blame is White's not having taken Modell seriously from the get-go.
We established one deadline after the other, and it would come to pass and nothing would happen.
I feel very strong that the politicians knew the seriousness of the situation and turned their backs on it. They didn't have the money and had really lied to Art, telling him that they would take care of him when the time came.
They just assumed that there's no way he was going to do this because this was a storied franchise. How could he possibly ever think about moving that team?
They played a political game with me, and it came back to haunt them and haunt me.
Well, there you have it, the top 5 reasons why you can't blame Art Modell for moving the Browns to Baltimore. Maybe you changed your mind, maybe you didn't. Maybe even those reasons and a new team with the same name won't allow you to understand. We hope we made you at least think about the move in a different light. I'm Brian Kenny. Thanks for joining us.